Hi guys, it's Tasman, the Aspiring Kryptonian here, and I have a little something different for you this week. So it's not an adventure, the adventures of a Superman collector, and it's not an episode of Comic Book Chatter, sadly, but it's going to be an interview with the one and only Robert Venditti. Now, Robert has been smashing it with his stories so far, or recently anyway. I've been reviewing and reading the Man of Tomorrow series that he did, which was the digital first with DC, and I haven't read it yet, but I've heard very good things about his current run on Hawkman. But yeah, I had the pleasure of interviewing him, I think it was a couple of weeks back now, so I apologise for the lateness of this video, but it was worth the wait. So we had a great little chat about Superman, of course, about his career in comics and where he's going from his current work at DC. So obviously Hawkman has finished, or will be finishing very soon. Man of Tomorrow has also finished, so what is in store for Robert Venditti? But I hope you guys enjoyed the interview. It was a blast to do, and it was a pleasure to talk to Robert about his work on Man of Tomorrow especially. We did talk about Hawkman briefly and some of his other work with comic characters and things like that. So yeah, it was a pleasure. So thank you again, Robert, for your time, and I hope you guys enjoy. So how did you get into writing comic books?
Right. So I got into comics kind of a weird way. I always knew I wanted to be a writer, even when I was a young kid. Even as early as like elementary school, I was always writing stories. I think that came from originally I wanted to be an artist, and Bugs Bunny cartoons were sort of the highest profession for me. And so I would try to draw those things. I had animation books, and I would try to sketch, and I could tell at a very young age that I was not good at it. And so I think I started telling stories as a way to describe in words what I couldn't draw with my hand. And even as I went through middle school and into high school, a lot of those early stories I did, which my mom still has them all, uh, they were very, very descriptive, almost like I was trying to draw with words. But I stick with it, doing stories. I took creative writing in high school. I went to college and got an English degree with a focus on creative writing, and then got a master's in creative writing in grad school. And I was always doing fiction. I had never read comic books in my whole life. I'm not exactly sure why, because my older brother did. And I remember seeing them when I would go to the barber shop. I remember very specifically there was this old bent up Unknown Soldier comic that I would always see at the barber shop, and I would flip through, or had some Tarzan comics that Marvel did back in the day and things like that. But I never really read comics. I don't know why. I was a big reader, read novels, all those things. It wasn't until I was in grad school that a friend of mine that I worked with at a bookstore was always trying to get me to read comics. And he was telling me one day about a story that sounded very interesting, and it was in Kurt Busiek's Astro City. I believe it's the second arc. It's called Confession, and it's about a priest who gets bitten by a vampire and still wears a cross on his chest, even though it burns him to remind him of this sin that he had committed to allow him to get bit by a vampire. And it's just very literary, very character-oriented, and very character-focused. And that was all the principles that I was studying and trying to, implement myself and the fiction that I was writing. So I decided I wanted to try to write comics, and not having an idea how to get into it. I had moved to Atlanta at this time, and there was a publisher here called Top Shelf Productions that I volunteered to work in their warehouse. And while I was there, I wrote the script for my first book called The Surrogates, and I gave it to them. And Top Shelf is normally sort of an independent company. They do a lot of black and white comics. They actually publish, I believe they still do, but at that time they published the whole Eddie Campbell comics line, like all his Bacchus books, and they published From Hell. So there's a lot of that style of stuff. And Surrogates was much more full color and science fiction and things. And I said, if this isn't what you all want to do, it's totally fine. But if you help me get the script in shape and you think it's good enough, you can introduce me to Dark Horse or Vertigo or somebody like that. But they ended up liking it, deciding to publish it themselves. And through a bunch of circumstances, it was adapted into a film. And that really sort of helped get my career going, because now I had a resume piece, this graphic novel that I could hand to an editor. And they had heard of it, through the film or what have you. And it kind of opened up a lot of doors for me.
So when you started working, volunteering at that place, did you know that you wanted to, did you already have sort of a rough script, that you wanted to write then, or in that situation and environment, so you started being more interested in it?
It was an idea that I had, but I didn't know. I mean, honestly, you want to be a writer, and my dad was a construction worker until his body couldn't take it anymore. Then he sold concrete, and my mom worked in retail and then was a court stenographer a little while, so I didn't know anybody that was in the arts. I didn't know any musicians. I didn't know any photographers or painters, you know. And my mother was an avid reader, and she would always give me her novels, and there's certainly appreciation for writing, but it seems so far-fetched that it's something that you could actually grow up and do. So for me, I didn't have these grand designs if I want to write this book and get it made into a movie, or I want to write Superman one day, or any of these kinds of things, because it all just seems so impossible. If I could write one story and it gets published one time and a handful of people read it,
Yeah.
I'll know that I was able to do it, and I'll go dig ditches or do whatever. You know what I mean? And that's really all I really thought about in those early
Yeah,
days.
step by step rather than the
Yeah, I didn't really have some grand plan of where I was going to end up, and even now, and I don't mean this disingenuously, the idea that somebody wants to talk to me about the fact that I wrote Superman, or that somebody would ask me for my autograph at a convention or something, every single time it shocks me. You know, it never gets old. It's I think about the things that I've been able to do and the characters that I've worked on. And, you know, I go to a party, and unless there's an astronaut there, I got the coolest job in the room. You know what I mean? And it's such a weird thing for where I come from for that to be the case. But yeah, so I just feel very fortunate to have had all of it happen, and
Yeah.
I never really thought about career trajectory or things like that.
I can say one thing for sure. So get used to writing your autograph on Superman comics, because if I ever meet you one day, then I'm going to get you to sign all my collection. But
I hope so. Yeah, and unfortunately, only 3 of them are printed so far.
I
So
know that
it
was
won't be like Green Lantern where a guy walks up with like 86 issues or whatever. You know what I mean? But
there's always
uh,
the person at a convention though that has the big suitcase full of comics.
yeah, which I don't mind. I don't mind at all. I tell them, come back later. I'll sign them throughout the day. You know, I never charge for an autograph or any of those kinds of things, because, like I say, it just seems so, I don't know, absurd to me.
Speaking of Superman, so Man of Tomorrow, how did that come about?
So yeah, I've been working at DC for quite a while. I've made no secret of the fact during my time at DC that Superman is my favorite character. And it's funny, because I don't come from comic books and I didn't read them until I was in my late 20s.
Yeah.
I have no concept of any of the continuities or any of the mythologies within the comic book universes. You know, my first interaction with Superman was as a kid being in theater.
Yeah.
And I believe I saw Superman 1 in the theater, but I don't remember. I was so young. What I do remember very vividly, and I remember the movie theater I was at, and where my parents were seated around me, and the seat, and I remember all of it, was watching Superman 2. And I was at just that right age that when he comes out of the particle chamber and he's lost his powers, and General Zod is standing there, and in my little kid head, I said, Superman has lost his powers. I don't know what the world's going to do, you know? And Christopher Reeve was just so much my Superman in that way. And then, you know, he crushes General Zod's hand and the music takes off. And um, for that, Superman just always imprinted on me at a very young age, even though I had never read a Superman comic. So at DC, it's kind of a known entity that if you're going to call Rob and you're going to ask him to pitch on Hawkman, he's not going to have any idea what you're talking about, right? And so you're going to get like a different take maybe than somebody who's read all the Hawkman over the years, which I think is something that I can bring maybe that other writers can't, because as I always say, you can't fake stupid, you know? So like if I had read Hawkman my whole life, I couldn't suddenly forget it and try to make a fresh take at it. It works against me in that I have to do a ton of research, you know, especially when you come to a character like Superman, and it's this thing that goes back to the 1930s, you know. It's very long, and the Hawkman is manageable. You can choke that down. It's been like 250 issues of Hawkman, you know, that's manageable.
Yeah.
Superman, there's no way you're going to read it all. So for me, it was the influences from the films, Christopher Reeve, that aspirational aspect of the character, um, the charm and the gentlemanliness and the well-manneredness of the character that was never played as hokey or corny or off-putting, you know. It was all those qualities that just throughout my life, Superman has always been one of my favorite character in comics, probably one of my favorite characters in all of literature, you know. So everybody at DC knew that. And when there came an opportunity for these books that were originally conceived for this giant line, and the approach that the editor and I wanted to take was very much, and this is going to sound weird, but it was very much like Batman the Animated Series, because I had watched Batman the Animated Series on TV, but I had never watched Superman the Animated Series because at that time I was in college and I don't think I had the channel, maybe. I don't know. I never saw it. But I can guess what it would have been like by watching Batman, right? How that animated series, while Batman is a cool character and it's dark, you know, it was never grim and it was fun and it embraced the variety of the villains, you know, the Mad Hatter and Scarface and, you know, Joker was played as you know, scary but fun. And, you know, so I can only imagine what Superman would, the animated series would be like. And so I was talking with the editor, I said, that's very much what I would want to do with something like this. I would want every issue to be self-contained, just like an animated cartoon. It's a new villain every time. You understand who Jimmy is, Lois, Perry, Clark, and Superman, because they're very much two different people. It's a new concept every issue, self-contained. You don't have to read number 1 to understand what's going on in number 6 or anything like that. And make it something that anybody can read. You know, if I want to give it to my 9-year-old son and have him read it, he understands everything that's happening and who all these characters are, even though he's never read a Superman comic. And if it's somebody like me who's reading it, you recognize all of those things that you appreciate about the character and the mythology and that supporting cast, going all the way back to Superman 2 and Richard Donner films and things like that. And so that was kind of the mission statement that we stayed with.
Yeah.
And you know, it's not deep continuity, it's not main universe Superman, but for me, it was extremely rewarding to be able to do those kind of stories and to work with Paul Pelletier on it, who is just a great choice for that animated feel. And he's able to communicate a lot of that, you know, folksiness and charm without ever having it stray into hokiness. Like there's very few people that could deliver a line, you know, the way Christopher Reeve did or the way Paul Pelletier draws it. And it comes off in a way that's inspiring and not eye-rolling. You know what I mean?
His artwork
And
is
that's
amazing.
the line you always have to walk with Superman, you know? How good can he be?
Yeah.
You know, how much of a Boy Scout could he be without you making the audience roll their eyes, you know? And I don't know, I feel like it's a line that we walked really well throughout our series.
Yeah, you did, definitely. So was all this sort of an idea that you had and you pitched, or was it that, like you said, there was an opportunity and they already had the ideas and the characters and they wanted to use them?
Yeah, they came to me and they knew they were doing this genre and that they wanted it to be, you know, self-contained. But other than that, all the concepts and all the stories, sometimes I'll say to the editor, you know, pick a villain. And they'll say Parasite. And I'll just go figure out who Parasite is and make
I
up a
was going
story.
to ask you, actually, how did you pick the villains? Because some of them are really classic ones, like the prankster, who, well, at the minute I'm reading the Golden Age. Well, I'm going through all the Superman comics that are ever released, which is a big task. But at the
That is
minute,
a huge
a lot of the
task.
prankster, there's a lot of the prankster, and in those comics, I can't stand him, and I just find him really irritating. But so you brought him back, and you gave him a little bit of a twist. And there's all these other villains that you've brought in as well. But how did you go about picking those ones?
Once in a while, I'll say to the editor who I worked on the book, Andrew Marino, I've worked with him on many things, Green Lantern, Freedom Fighters, all kinds of stuff. I know him really well. We work really well together. He's a very talented editor, very gifted, very great with notes. And so I have a lot of trust in him, you know. And so for a lot of the stories, I think I came up with 5 of those first 6 stories, and I put them in the pitches, you know, so it would have been the Gambler, Toyman, the one with like the swamp kind of creaturey guy, you know, and then also the 2-parter that had Lex Luthor in it at the end, you know. And he said, well, we want 6 because that would be a whole year because they were going to come out once every 2 months. And I was like, pick a villain and I'll just go figure it out. And he's like, he said Parasite. I was like, okay, I'll go. I don't know who Parasite is, but I'll go read about him and we'll do a story, you know. And so what I wanted to do was use each individual villain, have some of them be established, and have some of them be new. So the Gambler, even though there was a character called the Gambler way back in the Golden Age, what we did was entirely different than what that Gambler did. So I want to do some that were like villains that you would know, some that were completely new characters that you don't know, and have each story have some sort of moral or lesson to it, you know, and try to have as much of the supporting cast take part in it as well, because I think that's what a lot of those. Superman is very aspirational, and he does lead by example, and he flies, but he's never above us. You know, he is among us, you know, and I think that's one of the things that's so great about his character, there's obviously stories where you read them and there's alternate universe things and whatever, but I just don't see him as ever becoming a tyrant. Like, it's so anathema to who he is in his makeup. And he believes that mankind is inherently good. He believes in the best of all of us. And even when we are a criminal like Parasite, we deserve a chance to learn and grow and become better. And even for somebody like Metallo, we can't kill this person because we take away any chance they'll ever have to be better, and I don't know, hokey as it sounds, this is how I view the world, because otherwise I don't know why I really get out of bed every day if it's all just terrible, you know what I mean? So I wanted to embrace all those aspects of the character.
Yeah, I'd say that was going to be one of my questions a little bit later on, but sort of most issues sort of focus on one particular sort of personality, forgiveness, and giving Parasite the second chance. So where did you get that inspiration from? Because obviously I know we've kind of touched on that, where you said you look towards the Christopher Reeve Superman, but are there any sort of other areas that you are familiar with where that's the case? So comics, TV, things like that.
It's just how I see the character. I think when I'm sitting down and I'm thinking about any character that I'm going to write, I don't want the world to think, I don't want the readers to know what I think, because they're thinking about what I think. You know what I mean? So when you read a Hawkman comic written by me, it should read very differently than a Superman comic written by me, because they're two different characters and you're supposed to be thinking about what Hawkman and Superman think, And so I really just try to put myself in his position, and why would he do any of the things that he does? If not because he believes in the goodness of people. And how could he not believe in the goodness of people? Because he crashed on a rocket in the middle of a field, and the first two people that he encountered took him in and loved him and raised him as their own, So even though he's not human, how could he not think the best of us? And I wanted to reflect that in the stories, so that even when it's somebody who's a villain, he still would want to believe that there's good in them, and that they can be changed, and that they can learn and they can grow. And that's kind of what we did with Parasite along the way,
Well, and Metallo as well. And I guess even though you said you haven't read that many Superman comics or weren't familiar with the continuity and things like that, but what I was going to say is that the series Man of Tomorrow, when I read it, obviously I'm reading the comics that are coming out now of Superman, and it's completely different to what we're currently reading. So are you familiar with those comics?
Sure, yeah. I read a ton of DC stuff. I try to keep on top of what's going on in the universe, just because it's part of the job, right? Like, I write for DC Comics, so I want to be aware of what's happening. So yeah, I read all the Superman stuff, and I've been reading Superman comics all the way back to the beginning of the New 52, because that's kind of when I came in at DC. I've been reading Superman in Action and Justice League and all those kinds of things. And I had an idea I was going to do for Mongol, but Brian Bendis had just done something with Mongol, so I was like, I'll do something else, things like that. But I didn't worry about continuity or any of those kinds of things, because we were very much doing our own story. And of course, you get a lot of those questions on social media, like, where does your stories fit in or whatever? And it's wherever you want. They're just meant to be classic stories that can fit in anywhere. And 20 years from now, you could hopefully, if they make one, pull this graphic novel down off the shelf and read it, and it still fits in with the Superman universe and all those things, because it embraces all of the classic sort of iconic aspects of the character that you hope would endure.
And I guess with writing I guess standalone story, you get much more creative freedom with it as well. So obviously, I'm sure Bendis is down to, whereas you can do sort of whatever you want.
Yeah, he's got a double hard job, right? Because he's not just doing Superman, he's also doing action. So he has like his own continuity that he's doing in one book that also be connected to another book that also has to be connected to a wider DC universe, right? So that's a much heavier thing. And I've certainly worked on books like that. I wrote Green Lantern when it was part of a 5-book and things like that. But it is very freeing to just work on stories and just kind of do what you want, and stay true to the character. And we kind of developed our own continuity. Parasite is in issue 1, and he comes back again in issue 14. And Lex Luthor was kind of building in the background, and then had a story, and Metallo builds. And when I mentioned the prankster, when we use him, I think it's issue 13.
Yeah.
There was a moment in issue 5, I think, where Clark and Lois are on the phone, and they're trying to figure out how Lex Luthor got all his robots with the city and all these kinds of things. And Clark hangs up the phone, and he's like, I just got off the phone with a friend of mine in Central City. They just caught the prankster because he left Metropolis because it's just too hard to do crime here anymore. And so then when we brought him back in 13, he was doing a prisoner transfer from Central City back to Metropolis. That's why he was in the van. So I know those are very small things.
Yeah. Well,
but
I didn't even
if
know.
you haven't read all the issues, you would never know that you missed anything.
Yeah.
But if you have, it's a little reward for you.
Yeah, that's good. So with the character interaction, mostly Lois and Clark, the way you sort of handle their marriage and relationship is, it's incredible. And I think talking about the amount of suits that he ruins when he changes into costume. But so where did you get the references for that? Is that from personal experience, or is it from like a TV show program?
No, for me, it's just something that came up. I'm married. I've been married 19 years this year.
Yeah.
I don't wear a suit to work. It's one of the perks of the job. But I did want to portray their relationship as a married relationship, and to ground them in the same sort of things that we all deal with. And so they're both reporters. These are not wealthy people, and to be living in a city like Metropolis, which I liken to something like New York. I think the first time we go to their apartment, it says, a rent-controlled apartment tower or whatever, because they don't own that apartment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, well, they can only afford to live there because of rent control. And so I just wanted to introduce elements like that very much humanizes these characters and makes them relatable. Because what I have done when I was a kid, and even now, I remember I had to go to a banquet with my wife, and I had to go buy a suit because I didn't own one, and I had to buy a certain tie and whatever. And so I'm sitting there at the table, and we're going to have this meal while the banquet's going on and all these kinds of things. The first bite of my salad, I pick it up, cucumber falls off like a little wheel and rolls all the way down my tie, leaves my ranch dressing all the way down my tie, and it's just like I'm always dropping stuff on my clothes. I'm always doing those kinds of things. And so she doesn't get mad at me and be like, we can't afford new clothes. But it just seemed like if you're Superman, he's always ripping his shirt open.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, where does this dude get his clothes budget from? You know what I mean? So it just seemed like it's something that struck me as something that would make sense. And I had never seen it before in the comics, which isn't to say
I've never seen that sort of attention to detail before in the Superman comics. So I think that really added.
And I just thought I could play it as a recurring joke throughout them. So again, if you're reading every issue, you're waiting for the close gag. So like in issue 4, him and Lois don't really talk about it, but he like climbs through the fence and he catches his shirt on barbed wire and he rips it. And then like Paul drew this awesome panel of him just steamed with like the squiggly line over his head. You understand from reading the other issues. In the moment, you get that he's mandatory his suit. But if you read all the other issues, you know that he's got to go home and explain to Lois.
Yeah.
I was climbing through a fence and I tore another suit.
I think it was in one of the later issues. I can't remember exactly which one it is, but there's no mention of it. But there's just a panel of him and his folded suit perfectly on his desk, which I really like. That it made me laugh.
Yeah, exactly. That was him saying goodbye to Lois. Like, I don't know if I'm making it back from this one, but
finding out the lesson about the suit.
And what would break her heart more than that?
Yeah.
She'd give anything to have him go ruin that suit and know that he was going to come back. You know what I mean? So it's just little things like that. So I'm glad you caught that. Yeah.
So, we mentioned it before, but obviously these issues are mostly digital. I think the first 3 that have been released physically?
The first 3, yeah. There were plans to do a lot more of them, but with all the shutdowns from COVID and things like that, printer plants were closed, comic book shops were closed, retail stores were closed, and so we had already had a lot of story banked because we were very far ahead on the pub schedule. So DC decided to put a lot of these things out as digital just to keep content out there and have something for people to read in a time when a lot of people, I think, wanted some escape.
It definitely.
And so they moved them to digital, and I don't know what will happen with them as far as print from here forward. I would certainly love for them to be in print.
I think I keep getting
You know, all the stories I would love to stick around, but even one like number 12, which was standalone, where the whole issue Superman is holding up, you know, the
yeah,
comic book art and things like that. You know, to me, it was my statement on Superman, not just as a character, but what he means to the entire DC universe. Like, he's literally the foundation on which the entire universe is built. You know, and so I wanted to do that story where he's holding up all the panels and things like
that
that.
was a really nice touch as well. That
Yeah, yeah, the art was amazing in that whole issue. So I'm super proud of that. And I would love for it to be accessible in print where people can read it and see it, as opposed to digital, which I think could be more limiting. But we'll see what happens. You know?
yeah. Well, luckily it's International Dog Day, and you can hear my dog barking in the background.
I'm surprised you haven't heard mine yet. My wife just came home from work, and I could hear her barking. So, yeah.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's fine.
So obviously, well, there's been 15 issues of Man of Tomorrow, and I'm sure, well, like me, I'm sure many people tweet you and write reviews and things. Like, what's the response been like for you?
It was really, really positive. You know, I was really happy to see it. You know, a lot of people tweeting me and things like that, and just really liking how we handled the character, and you know, also always made sure we had a role for Jimmy or for Lois or, you know, other things like that. The variety of the villains. A lot of people really appreciate the self-contained nature of it. You
Yeah,
know, every story was a complete story, which got a little bit harder because originally the first three were 24 pages each, and then that Walmart Giant program changed, and they all became 16 pages
yeah,
after that. So it became a lot harder to do that. But I think we made it work, and
yeah,
so yeah, I was extremely happy with the response to it, and you know, people picking up a lot of the little things that you hope they get, like the clothing thing, or uh, you know, the response to issue 12, you know, and the art and what we did with the story there. So um, I love doing it. I think I did 11 stories when it all was said and done, you
yeah.
know, and I hope to get to do more with the character, but you know, we'll see what happens, you know.
Well, that kind of leads me on to my next question. So I know obviously you work at DC and quite closely with Bendis and all of the other people that work there and write for the characters, but a lot of people, well, in my experience, in response to the reviews that I've done for your series, have, well, expressed their need or want for you to write a solo Superman sort of permanently.
Mhm.
Would that be something you would be interested in doing?
Oh yeah, 100%. I've come close a couple times, you
Yeah.
know, but sometimes things just don't work out, you know.
Anything you can tell
Uh,
us about those couple of times?
well, the very first thing I ever pitched for DC,
Yeah.
ever, you know. So at this point, I think I'd maybe published one issue of Exo Man of War, you know, in the Surrogates, and like that was it, you know. And so an editor from DC reached out to me um, and said, "I like your stuff. I want you to pitch on Superman. You're not going to get it because nobody even knows who you are.
Manage
But put a pitch
executive.
together, put a pitch together, and we'll pass it around. And from that pitch, hopefully people will see how you put a story together and they'll say, yeah, we're not giving this guy Superman. We don't know who he is. Well, he can go do Demon Knights. And that's exactly what happened, you
Yeah.
know. So I put this whole pitch together for Superman. And a lot of the things that were in that pitch I used for these Man of Tomorrow stories.
Good.
The clothing gag and uh, the idea of the gambler and things like that. If I had done them in universe, they would have been, you know, more serious and less all ages kind of, you know. But it was the same principles, the same take, and the same understanding of the character and the motivations of the cast and all those kinds of things. So I ended up using them for Man of Tomorrow years later. But that's exactly what happened. I turned in that pitch. They liked it. They didn't give it to me, the Superman book. I think it went to Scott Lobdell maybe. And then they had me do Demon Knights, and that was the first thing I did for DC.
Yeah.
And that led to, you know, all the other stuff I've done at DC, and I come back around and I do the Superman 8 years later or whatever it is. You know what I mean? So I would love to do the character in universe, either Superman or Action Comics. I would love to do either one.
Yeah.
I hope it comes around someday, but I don't know. You never know. You know?
So, well, we kind of already talked about this as well, because all the questions that I have coming up, we've kind of touched on a little bit already.
Yeah,
But have you always been a fan of Superman?
oh yeah, ever since I was little. Yeah. definitely my favorite superhero. For Marvel, it would be Captain America, but like if it's the two
Another
of them
thing.
together, yeah, if it's the two of them together, it's Superman. He's my favorite. And I've always been more drawn to the DC universe. Um, I think because historically the DC universe has always felt more aspirational to me. Um, I do love grounded stories,
Yeah.
very much so. And if you read my creator-owned work, you know, whether it's the Surrogates or 6 Days, which is a World War II graphic novel that I did, I think a year ago for a little over a year ago for Vertigo. Um, I do like grounded stories, but I always loved sort of the aspirational aspect of DC heroes.
Yeah.
Never really cared much for Peter Parker, you know, trying to make rent or I don't know. I don't know. I just didn't. You know what I mean? I liked Superman. I liked Green Lantern. I liked Flash. I like those kinds of
I'm with you on
things.
that one.
Um, that's not to say there's not Marvel characters that I do like, and maybe I'll write for Marvel one day. But Superman has always been my favorite. Yeah.
So you said that your first introduction to Superman was the Christopher Reeve films. Do you
Mhm.
remember your first introduction to Superman comics?
Honestly, I think probably the first time I ever read a Superman comic would have been during the New 52
Yeah.
because that's when I started working at DC and I got on their comp list where they would send me everything that they printed. And so I started reading everything to stay on top of the universe.
Yeah.
So I think like the first Superman stuff I would have read would have been like Grant Morrison's Action Comics at the
Yeah.
beginning of the New 52. I don't remember who launched the New 52 Superman series. I can't even remember. Who was it?
I don't actually know. This is the thing with me as well. So that's why I'm going through all this reading order, starting from the
Yeah.
beginning to current, because I've only really started. I've collected comics for years. I've just never actually read them. I've just sort of looked at the artwork, to be honest. So
Yeah.
I think when I started reading Superman comics was when Bendis first started. To be honest, it wasn't
Oh
that
wow, so pretty
long.
recent.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'd
Wow.
read the classic graphic novels and like Red Sun and All Star Superman and things like that. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, comic series was Bendis when he
So
first.
what draws you to the character so much? If you're such a new reader to the character, you know?
Oh no, it was the films, to be honest. When I grew up, when I was younger, I used to watch The New Adventures of Lois and Clark, the one with Dean Cain. To watch that with my granddad.
Okay.
So I've been, well, I'm not obsessed, but I've been interested in the character since then. And then I think it was in 2006 when Superman Returns came out. I've been hooked ever since, and that's when I started collecting Superman memorabilia.
My wife is a huge fan of the Henry Cavill Superman. I gotta say,
So am
she's
I.
a big proponent of that. And like, she went to San Diego with me one year,
Yeah,
and it was the year that they were promoting Suicide Squad. And I just happened to be doing my signing at the DC booth. You know, when that, you know, I was supposed to do a 1 hour signing, and she's next to me because we're just hanging out.
yeah.
And they come to me and they say, "We have to shut down your signing a half hour early. Sorry, but the whole Suicide Squad cast is getting ready to walk over here." And so I was like, "Cool." And so like they put up the velvet rope, and I had like the best seat in the whole place because my wife and I are behind this table,
Yeah.
and like we're all on stage right there, and it was just like a crush of people, not around us because we're behind a table and we're all safe, you know. And it was Will Smith and Jared Leto and
Great timing.
yeah, everybody was there, you know. But she never got to see Henry Cavill, and so
Oh yeah, he went up with the mask on, didn't he? And
he
got his
did, right? But we didn't know. We didn't know, and so we knew that he was around, and then other people had got to meet him. You know, some of the people who work for DC, like staff or whatever.
yeah.
But she never got to meet him. So
Uh,
I haven't been able to make that happen.
Me too. So going back to Superman, what was it about the character that first drew you to him?
You know, going back to me as such a little kid, you
Yeah,
know, seeing Christopher Reeve in the theater. Um, I think that like it's gonna sound weird, but I think I just kind of think like Superman does. You know, like I've always tried to see the best in people, and I always give people a chance, and uh, I believe people are good. You know, sometimes you get burned with that kind of attitude, but that's always kind of the way that I've thought of things, and so I don't think that's an attitude that maybe develops in you. I think maybe it's just the way you think about the world, and maybe it's instilled in you from your parents or something, I guess. Who knows where those things come from? But I think seeing him on screen, it was a character that I feel like viewed things the way that I did. Not that I thought about it that way as at such a young age, because you don't think about those things. But you see something in the character that you can relate to, and you find like you know a kinship there. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? I don't get Batman. I never have gotten Batman,
Yeah.
and I certainly think the Batman can be entertaining, and there are comic book works of genius that center on that character that I read and I have an enormous amount of affection for, but I just don't get a guy who's that grim and
Yeah.
thinks that view of the has that view of the world. And I get why he does, because he watched his parents get killed.
Yeah.
All makes perfect sense to me, but it's just nothing that I would ever want to do, And whenever I would talk to editors at DC about characters that I want to work on or whatever, it's always a joke. Don't say Batman because everybody wants to do Batman. And I'm always like, it's not Batman. I don't ever want to write Batman. I don't have any interest in it. Um, Again, I have respect for the character and the storytelling. I love the Michael Keaton films. But as far as like what I relate to as a person, it's it's different. And so I think a lot of Batman fans probably feel the same way about Superman.
Yeah. Well, I know
So,
that's definitely. I think I've had arguments with Batman fans and fans that don't like Superman or think he's boring and things like that. So yeah, people definitely do think that. But so is that where you is that how you sort of pinpoint the characters that you do want to work with? So you need to have that sort of resonation with them, or like you said, the kinship.
I think so, yeah. And sometimes you find it. I'd never heard of. I mean, I knew who Hawkman was as a visual.
Yeah.
From like that Justice League cartoon. Whenever that was, the '70s or something.
Yeah.
But I didn't know anything about the character. And when they called to pitch me, to ask me if I wanted to pitch for Hawkman, they knew that I didn't know anything about the character because I never know anything about any of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I don't know. I say I'll go look it up and I'll go find out. And I didn't know that there was Carter Hall and Qatar Hall and that they're two separate things and whatever. So I go and sit down that first night and I do what I always do. I start on Wikipedia. I was like, let me read about Parasite or whatever this thing is. You know what I mean? So I'm reading about it. And I think in my head, oh, I get it. Carter Hall and Qatar Hall are the same guy. He just reincarnates across time and space. And two different lives of the same person.
Yeah.
And I read all this research and that never happened. And I was like, well, I think that's going to be my story then. And now it becomes a story. I don't know if you read Hawkman, but the story, the mythology that we kind of brought to the character was that in his original very first life, thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago, he was a villain. He was like a warlord general who went from planet to planet and captured people and sacrificed them to this dark god. And over time, realized what he was doing was wrong and sacrificed his own life to end it. And when he went to the afterlife, he was given an opportunity. You can either stay dead now, or you can go back and you will reincarnate across time and space as many times as it takes for you to save as many lives as you killed. And he says, I want to go back. And so this whole time throughout the DC universe, Carter Hall is Qatar Hall, is Qatar Ol, which is a story you should read if you haven't read it. We introduced a Kryptonian Hawkman who was there when the planet explodes up. It's Hawkman issue 8. It's like a
I haven't read the Hawkman series, but I've heard so many good things about it. It is on my list to start.
Yeah, Brian Hitch reads it, but you would love number 8 because he was Qatar Ol and he was on Krypton and he was like a historian and he was Supergirl's teacher. And so I don't know, it's cool. You should read it. Brian Hitch drew it. It's amazing. It's one of the issues of my whole career I'm the most proud of. The cover is like Qatar Ol opening his shirt and it's like a hawk symbol underneath it.
Yeah, I'm sure I would have seen the cover at least.
Anyways, so if you think about that story, it's kind of similar to what I'm saying about Superman, right? Even though Carter Hall, started out in his first life as this massive villain, he had goodness in him, and he found it, and he learned, and he became better. And these are all the same principles that apply to a Superman character, right? So I don't know that I only pick characters that do those things, but I think sometimes I find those things in the character and I apply them as opposed to doing something that's, super dark or any of that kind of stuff,
Would you ever sort of put yourself out of your comfort zone in a way to challenge yourself with a character like Batman or something a bit darker?
Yeah, sure. And I always try to challenge myself with everything. I think if you go throughout my career and you look at the things that I've done, um, I've done science fiction,
Yeah.
I've done political thriller, I've done World War II history, I've done Hawkman and Superman and Green Lantern. I've done a bunch of stuff for Valiant, like X-Men Man of War and stuff like that. So I've also done kids novels that I wrote. I always try to do something different with every project
Yeah.
so that I am always challenging myself. There's definitely that school of thought when I did Surrogates, people said, okay, you came right out of the gate, you did a sci-fi story, people loved it, you got a Bruce Willis movie out of it, do nothing but sci-fi, you know? And that's a very valid approach to a career because you can become, the Elmore Leonard of sci-fi or something, you know what I mean? Not saying that I would ever be the Elmore Leonard, but you get the point. And so for me though, what keeps me engaged is getting outside my comfort zone, doing different stories, so that even though you don't always succeed, and I have things that I've done that I don't think are as good as other things that I've done, um, at least I know I'm always challenging myself. And really, that's the only way you're ever going to grow as a writer is get outside that comfort zone. So there are definitely some things that I would like to do. I've never done horror, but I would like to try horror because it's so different from my normal approach to stuff that I think it would be interesting. I almost wrote Constantine once. I had a chance at Hellblazer once, yeah, and I ended up not doing it because other opportunities came along, and it just would have been too much work. You
Yeah.
know, you always try to. I don't ever want to be the writer that takes so much work that I can't hit deadlines. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So
And it affects
there's
the
just too much
quality of
stuff
work
for me to
as
do
well.
all at once. It would have been around the same time, but I was starting up Green Lantern,
Yeah.
and I just didn't want to bite off more than I could chew. And so
No.
I didn't end up doing it. But so who knows?
Yeah. Well, that kind of leads me on to another question. But are there any characters that you'd like to work with that you haven't worked with yet?
Oh, a million, yeah. I would love to do the JSA. I would love to do Nightwing.
Yeah.
Nightwing is sort of to me like the Clark Kent of the Batman family. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
So
Like
good.
he
Yeah.
he is he is from tragedy, but I see him very much as a character who sees the good in people, and is very aspirational in that way. And so I would love to do Nightwing. I already know what I would do with a whole Nightwing run if I
Yeah.
ever get an opportunity. But there's a lot. There's probably a ton of characters I don't even know about
Yeah. True.
that I would love to do, just like Hawkman. I knew nothing about Hawkman, and now Hawkman's one of my favorite characters. Just from reading it and sort of thinking about what makes that character tick, and hopefully they keep a lot of the stuff that we do, as it goes forward. But you never know with those sorts of things. So.
Yeah. Well, obviously, we've heard the news about Hawkman being cancelled despite how much work. What's the response to that news?
Yeah, I don't know if I would say canceled. I think is a bit of a tough word because I think in the modern environment where we're at, when I took on the Hawkman job, I was hoping we'd get to 12 issues.
Yeah.
If you think about how quickly things are rebooted and restarted in the modern comic book environment, uh, I didn't think we'd make it to 24. That was impossible. So to make it to 29, and it actually was supposed to end. It was supposed to end. I'm trying to remember. They were going to end it around 12.
Okay.
Then they kept it going. They were going to end it again at 25. They're going to end it again at 26, and then not 29. So it kept going. You know what I
Yep.
mean? So, yeah, to me, I don't feel it's like a cancellation. Um, but I think you asked me what other stuff I might be doing. Is that what you asked? Because you broke up a little bit.
Oh, sorry. What was the response like? So I think, when
Oh,
I saw that on Twitter, a lot of people replying to it and bombarding you with messages and making
yeah.
predictions of, like, to keep it and things like that.
No, it's great. It's great to see. I always try to get back to everybody or respond to everybody, but it's not always possible. But it was a huge outpouring, yeah, and a lot of people saying that it's their favorite, not even just their favorite DC comic, it's their favorite monthly book that they read right now.
Mm.
And just that anybody would say that about anything I wrote again is ridiculous, right? Like coming where I come
That's
from,
right.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, uh, and a lot of people who said I never liked the character, or I didn't care about the character, or I didn't know anything about the character, but now it's my favorite character. Like that's very rewarding because the idea that you're not going to do anything with Superman. Everybody knows who Superman is. Everybody knows who Batman is. You know what I mean? there's very few characters I think in comics where you can come and maybe leave a stamp and do some things that there's still opportunity there. And Hawkman was one of them, which is part of the reason why I took it.
Yeah.
You know, I said to myself, if we can be the ones who make sense of it all, and if people buy into it, we'll always be the people who fixed Hawkman. And there's just not that many opportunities left to do that, you know, like to do what Jeff Johns did for Green Lantern or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I feel like you kind of, on a much smaller scale. So obviously when you brought the prankster in, when I first picked up the comic, I was like, oh, prankster. I really enjoyed your rendition of prankster, and he was completely different to the prankster that I knew, well, that I know from the golden age that I'm currently reading. So obviously,
yeah, I never read the original, anything with the original prankster in him. I just read about him on Wikipedia, and it sounded just annoying, kind of, you know?
Yeah.
So I was like, what can I do with this character that would, one, maybe upgrade him a little, but two, make him pay for being annoying? You know what I mean? Like he's
I think that's
he's
why I
kind of
liked
like,
it so much as well. He got his comeuppance at the end.
he absolutely did, right? From his own wife. You know what I mean? Like, she can't. Can you imagine being married to that idiot? I mean, come on, right? You want that dude to stay in jail? So, like, yeah, I wanted to have a little fun with it. And, you know, originally I was just going to do the first 6 stories, and I was going to be the end of it. But the response to them was good. Editorially, they really liked what we were doing, so they asked me to do another 5. And because it was weekly, that's why there were those issues in between. Because they didn't ask me to do the other 5 until, like, I think number 6 was already done.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's weekly, you know, so they put 4 issues, 5 issues in between, I guess.
There was a moment where, well, there were loads of different artists and writers working on that series.
Yeah.
A few random.
Yeah, so they came to me and asked me to do more of them, and they called me on a Friday and said, we want to do more. Can you tell us what your next 5 stories are on Monday? And I was like, okay. So that weekend I came up with 5 more stories. And then when I turned them in, they said, okay. The prankster story was the only one that they took, because they weren't convinced on the prankster either, you know?
Yeah.
So I had to rework the prankster story a little bit. And then I had to turn one in every Friday. So that Friday I turned in one, then 5 weeks in a row I had to write a story, do all the revisions, have it done, and have 4 different artists drawing all those stories all at the same time, so they could all come out weekly. You know?
Yeah. Wow. A lot of work.
Yeah, so I didn't know there were going to be more, but when I came back to do the second grouping, I wanted to have a recurring villain like we did with Lex in the first one. I wanted to have some that were established villains and others that weren't. So, you know, we had, you know, Metallo but in the prankster, but we also had Groikus and, you know, Atlas, which isn't really a villain, but that was sort of the character of that story. And then I wanted to have some that were different in terms of genre. You know what I mean? Like in the first one, you had Toyman, which was kind of zany and weird. And so I wanted a zany and weird. And so that I went with Prankster. And again, that goes back to the inspiration from the Warner Brothers Batman animated series, where they would throw zany and weird at you. And it was fun and it was bizarre, but it made sense within its own universe. And so that's where Prankster came from.
So look into the future. Have you got anything else lined up at DC that you can tell us about, or are there any plans you can do next?
I'm all finished up. I'm done with the Man of Tomorrow stuff. I do have some other stuff in the works at DC, but it isn't anything that I can talk about.
Okay.
And I have some other projects I'm working on as well that have not been announced, and so I can't talk about those either. But I've been very fortunate that you know, I've been able to stay busy, you know, during everything that's been going on. And, you know, it's a tough time, and so I do have a lot of things, and I would think that within, you know, by the end of the year, you'll probably have heard about 3, maybe 4 of them, you know. But I always try to not get ahead of the marketing teams and the work that they're trying to do.
That's understandable. So, well, obviously
I do think you'll like one of them. So.
Okay, I'm gonna. Oh, you can't do that to me and not tell me. Okay. Well, I'm gonna leave it there before I ask you too many more questions about things that you can't talk about. But thank you for your time, Robert. It's been a pleasure.
No, I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. So I appreciate all the support for the series as well. You know, talking about the issues and you know, really reading them and paying attention to the little things, it really means a lot when you're a writer to have people respond to the things that way as opposed to just reading it and setting it aside. So thank you very much for that.
You're welcome. Well, because I run the Superman website, I think I'm obliged to read anything Superman, but Man of Tomorrow I really did enjoy, and it's probably one of my favorite. Well, for me, it's an instant classic, and whenever someone asks me what Superman comics would you recommend, that's probably at the top of my list, is what I'm trying to say.
That would be my hope, that for somebody like me who had never read a comic book and remembers walking into a comic book store and seeing Spider-Man number 3000 and Superman number 8 billion and just being daunted by it, like, how do I even know what to do? That you can hand these stories to those people and they'll understand everything they need to know about the character, no matter what age they are, and find something positive and hopefully something that they like.
Well, definitely. And well, yeah, we get to see you working with those characters again. The fact that you said I'm one of them, but thank you for your time again. And well, maybe we can catch up once these things have been announced.
Sure, be happy to.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.